Welcome to English with Zenko Master. Get ready to learn something new today.
My name is Marina Torres, and for most of my life, I believed I understood what it meant to be safe. I thought safety came from having enough money, from always working hard, from never taking risks. I lived by that idea for more than 20 years. Every morning I woke before the sun, made a quick cup of coffee, and walked to the train station in Port Alvery. The same cold wind greeted me at the corner near my street. The same shopkeepers were opening their shutters as I passed. The train came at the same time. The doors opened with the same sound, and I always took the same seat if I could. Then it was into the city, straight to the tall gray building where I worked as an accountant. My days were numbers, reports, and more numbers, and my life was simple and predictable. I did not go on holidays. I did not buy new clothes unless the old ones were beyond repair. I ate at home almost every evening. When my friends invited me to dinner or suggested a weekend trip, I would smile and tell them, "Not yet, maybe next year." I was not lazy, and I was not unhappy exactly. I just believed there would be a better time later. I was paying off an old family debt, and when that was finished, I wanted to save enough so that I would never have to worry. I liked seeing my bank account grow. It gave me a sense of control, as if I could protect myself from anything. I thought, one day I will be ready. One day I will rest. But that day never seemed to arrive. It was a cold morning in late winter when everything changed. The sky was a pale gray, and a thin layer of ice had formed overnight on the streets. I was hurrying to catch my usual train. My bag felt heavier than normal because I had brought home files to review the night before. I remember the sound of my boots on the platform and the low hum of the approaching train. People were moving quickly all around me, shoulders brushing, footsteps echoing in the large hall. I stepped forward, my mind already on the work waiting for me, when my foot found a patch of ice. My body slipped sideways, and the world tilted sharply. I heard a short gasp, my own, before the metal edge of the platform hit my side. My head hit something hard. The voices around me turned into a blur, and the cold floor pressed against my cheek. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer on the platform. The first thing I saw was a bright light above me, the kind that makes you squint. I could hear a steady beeping sound and the low hum of some machine nearby. My right arm was in a sling, and there was a dull, throbbing pain in my ribs. A nurse was standing at my bedside, checking something on a small screen. She noticed I was awake and smiled. She told me I had been lucky. The fall could have been much worse, but I had no broken bones. My body would be sore for a while, but I would recover. I thanked her quietly, though my throat felt dry. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Doctors asking questions, nurses adjusting pillows, the sound of carts rolling past my door. I drifted in and out of sleep. When I was fully awake, the room was quieter. Outside the window, the sky had turned from gray to pale gold as the afternoon sun appeared. I lay there, listening to the faint sounds from the hallway, and for the first time in a very long time, I had nothing to do. There was no report to finish, no phone call to make, no train to catch. I thought I would enjoy the rest, but instead I felt unsettled. My mind went over my life step by step, as if I were reviewing a long list of figures at work. For 20 years, I had built everything around security. I worked late. I avoided unnecessary spending. I skipped chances to explore, to rest, or to enjoy the present. I told myself it was for my future, that it was the wise thing to do. But lying there in that hospital bed, I could not stop wondering what that future was meant to look like. If my fall had been worse, and I had not opened my eyes again, all the money I had saved would have been meaningless. I would have left behind no stories of adventures, no memories of places I had dreamed of seeing, no moments of laughter in some unknown cafe. The next morning, the doctor came to check my condition. He said I would need several weeks away from work. Light walking would help my recovery later, but for now I should rest. Rest. It was a word I did not know well. My life had been built on constant motion, train rides, office work, careful planning, and endless saving. Without that routine, I felt like a bird without a branch to stand on. But somewhere inside, another part of me wondered if this pause was not a loss, but a gift. That afternoon, the nurse brought me lunch. It was a simple tray with vegetable soup, a slice of bread, and a cup of tea. I would not have remembered such a meal on any other day. But as I took the first spoonful, I noticed the warmth of the broth, the gentle flavor of the vegetables. The bread was soft, and the tea carried the faint scent of mint. It struck me how rarely I paid attention to such things. I was always thinking about my next task, my next number, my next deposit into the bank. I had missed so many small, gentle moments, and now here they were, filling the quiet space around me. That night, I lay awake in the stillness. I thought about people I had known who took trips to the mountains, who learned to dance, who met friends in faraway cities. I used to think they were careless, spending money without a plan. But maybe they knew something I had ignored, that the perfect time to live never comes by itself. If you keep waiting for it, you will wait forever. The thought made my chest feel both heavy and light at the same time. Over the next few days, I began to notice the world outside my small room. From my bed, I could see a patch of sky through the window. Sometimes it was bright blue, sometimes it carried slow-moving clouds. In the mornings, a golden light would reach the corner of my blanket, warming the fabric. Once, I heard someone laughing down the hallway, and it made me smile without thinking. I realized I had been too busy for moments like this for years. My days had been filled with the noise of my own plans, so much so that I had not heard the simple music of everyday life. It was on the fourth night, as I lay listening to the soft hum of the heating system, that a decision began to form in my mind. I did not want to return to the life I had before. Not exactly. I could still be responsible, but I could no longer make every choice as if joy were a dangerous thing. I wanted to see something new, to try something I had never done, to feel the world in a way I had been too afraid to allow. I promised myself that when I walked out of this hospital, I would not go straight back into the cage I had built for myself. When the doctor finally told me I could leave the hospital, it felt strange to stand again without the white walls around me. My legs were a little weak, but I could walk. The nurse helped me gather my few belongings and smiled as she wished me well. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered. I stood there for a moment, feeling the winter wind on my face. The city moved around me, busy as ever, but I was no longer part of that rush. I was a visitor in my own life. I took a taxi home. As the car moved through familiar streets, I saw the same shops, the same cafe where I sometimes bought tea, the same bus stop with people waiting in the cold. It was all the same, yet I felt different. My body was still sore, but my mind was alive in a way I could not explain. When the taxi stopped outside my small apartment building, I hesitated before going inside. For years, this had been my safe place, the one constant in my life. But now I wondered if safety had been another word for staying still. Inside, the apartment was quiet. My coat hung neatly by the door, just as I had left it. The small sofa sat under the window, and the same stack of unopened travel magazines lay on the coffee table. I walked over and picked one up. The cover showed a photograph of a lake surrounded by green hills. I had bought the magazine years ago, thinking I might plan a trip. But like all the others, it had been left unread. I set it back down and sat on the sofa. The silence in the room was heavy. I had told myself this was the life I wanted. Quiet, simple, controlled. But now, after the hospital, it felt more like a room where nothing had ever happened. That evening I made a simple meal, but it did not taste the same as it once had. My thoughts kept drifting back to the promise I had made to myself. I did not want to wait for one day anymore. I wanted to do something different now. But where would I start? I had never taken a trip alone. I had never booked a ticket or chosen a destination. The idea made me both nervous and excited. It was like standing at the edge of a new path, not sure where it would lead. The next morning, I sat at my small desk with my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I began to search. I typed in places I had heard of but never seen. Small towns, mountain villages, places near lakes and rivers. I looked at photos of markets full of color, quiet paths through forests, and train stations with signs I could not read. Each picture felt like an invitation. My heart beat faster as I imagined myself in those places. Then I saw a photograph of a lake surrounded by snowy mountains. The water was deep blue, and the shore was lined with tall pine trees. It looked peaceful, far from the noise of the city. Without thinking too much, I clicked on the link and found a train ticket to a town near the lake. My hand shook as I entered my details and paid. When the confirmation appeared on the screen, I felt a rush of energy. It was real. I was going. In the days before the trip, I prepared a small bag. I packed warm clothes, a notebook, and a book I had been meaning to read for years. I told myself I was ready, but on the morning of my departure, a small voice in my head whispered doubts. What if I didn't enjoy it? What if I felt lonely? What if I was wasting money I had worked so hard to save? I pushed the thoughts aside and reminded myself of the hospital room, of the promise I had made. Life would not wait for me. I had to go to it. The train station was busy, filled with the sound of footsteps, rolling luggage, and distant announcements. I found my seat and placed my bag beside me. As the train began to move, I watched the city buildings pass by, then slowly give way to open fields. The further we traveled, the more the landscape changed. Small villages appeared, their rooftops covered in frost. Rivers cut through the fields, shining under the winter light. I felt like I was watching a story unfold outside my window. Hours later, the train arrived in the small town. The air was colder than in the city, but it was fresh and clean. I could smell the pine trees even from the station platform. The streets were quiet, with only a few people walking by. My hotel was a short walk away, a small building with wooden shutters and a view of the hills. The woman at the desk greeted me warmly and handed me a key. My room was simple but comfortable, with a window that looked out towards the lake. I stood there for a long time, watching the water shimmer in the fading light. That evening, I wrapped myself in a scarf and walked down to the lake. The path was empty except for a man walking his dog in the distance. The air was still, and the water reflected the colors of the setting sun, gold, pink, and pale blue. I had never seen a sunset like this before. In the city, I was always too busy or too tired to notice. Now I stood in the cold air, breathing slowly, feeling the moment settle into me. I realized I was smiling without even thinking about it. The next day, I explored the town. I wandered through narrow streets lined with small shops selling handmade scarves and wooden carvings. I stepped into a bakery where the smell of warm bread made me forget the cold. The woman behind the counter offered me a small pastry filled with spiced fruit. I sat by the window, eating slowly, watching people pass by outside. It felt like I was part of a different world, one that moved at a softer pace. In the afternoon, I followed a path that led up into the hills. A local guide was leading a small group to a viewpoint above the lake. The climb was steady, and the cold air filled my lungs. Along the way, I spoke with an older woman who told me she visited this town every winter. She said she came here to remember that life was not only about schedules and responsibilities. Her words stayed with me as we reached the top. The view was wider than I could have imagined. The lake below, the mountains in the distance, and the quiet all around us. I felt small, but in a way that made the world seem more open. That night, I returned to the lake and sat on a bench near the shore. The stars above were brighter than I had ever seen them. Their light reflected on the water, making it seem as if the sky and the lake had joined together. I thought about all the years I had spent working late in my office, walking the same streets, ignoring moments like this. I could feel the truth settling in me. Money could never buy this kind of peace, this kind of beauty. It could not replace the time I had lost, but it could help me use the time I still had. Before I returned to my hotel, I made another quiet promise to myself. This would not be my last trip. I would see more places, meet more people, and fill my days with moments worth remembering. I did not know exactly how I would make it happen, but I knew I had taken the first step. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The morning of my departure came quietly. I woke to the sound of light snow against the window. The rooftops of the town were covered in white, and the lake shone like glass under the soft winter sky. I packed my bag slowly, wanting to take one last look from the window before leaving. I knew I would miss the stillness here. It wasn't only the mountains or the lake that I loved. It was the way I felt while I was here. I had been part of the days, not just rushing through them. The woman at the hotel desk wished me well and told me she hoped I would return. I promised her I would. On the way to the train station, I passed the small bakery. The smell of warm bread drifted out into the cold air. I stepped inside and bought one last spiced pastry, the same kind I had eaten on my first day. The baker wrapped it carefully, and I slipped it into my bag like a small treasure. On the train, I found my seat and watched the snow-covered hills fade into the distance. The quiet beauty of the lake gave way to fields, then towns, then the familiar gray buildings of Port Alvery. My phone buzzed with messages, but I left it in my bag. I wasn't ready to be pulled back into the noise of my old life. When I unlocked my apartment door, the room felt different. It wasn't smaller or darker, but it seemed less alive. I unpacked slowly, placing the travel magazines back on the coffee table. For years, they had been reminders of places I might see one day. Now, they felt like a map to where I could go next. I opened one and began to read. The next day, I returned to work. My colleagues asked how I was feeling, and I told them I was fine. But inside, I knew I had changed. I still did my job well, but I no longer let it take every part of me. I thought about the lake when I was tired, about the bakery when I was bored, and about the quiet mountain paths when the city felt too heavy. I began to save not just money, but time. On the first weekend, I walked to a park I hadn't visited in years. The trees were bare, the fountains still for winter, but I sat on a bench and felt calm. I watched people pass, a young couple with a baby, an old man feeding birds, children chasing each other on the frozen grass. These moments cost nothing, yet they felt richer than the evenings I used to spend working late. I started making changes. I joined a painting class in a small studio nearby. At first, I almost didn't go. My old habits tried to pull me back. I told myself I was too tired, that I should wait until the next month. But I remembered the hospital, the promise I had made. The studio smelled of paint and warm light. I was nervous, but I enjoyed every minute. I left with color on my hands and a feeling I had been missing for years. Soon, I booked another trip, this time to a coastal town in spring. I looked at photos of the harbor, the bright fishing boats, and the narrow streets lined with flowers. I didn't feel guilty about spending the money. I saw it as an investment in my life. Friends began to notice the change in me. I accepted their invitations for coffee or lunch. I told them about the lake, the hike, and the bakery. Some said they wished they could take a trip like that. I told them they could, if they stopped waiting for the perfect time. Months passed, and winter turned to spring. On the morning I left for the coastal town, I stood on the train platform and thought of that cold winter day when I had fallen. That accident had hurt my body, but it had also woken something in me. It had made me see that life was not a future to plan for, but something to step into. When I arrived at the coast, the air was soft with the smell of salt and flowers. The sea shimmered under the afternoon sun. I walked slowly through the streets, taking in the colors, the sounds, the feeling of being somewhere new. My journey had begun the day I left the hospital, but I knew now that it would never truly end. I didn't need to have every step planned. I just needed to keep moving toward the life I wanted, one day at a time, while I still could. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.